Among skyscrapers and painful memories, a young analyst struggles to prove that numbers can carry a soul. Amid the silence of stored letters and the cold decisions of Wall Street, she discovers that her light can illuminate paths no one else has dared to see. The fine rain swirled among the skyscrapers as Grace Parker adjusted the navy blue scarf around her neck. 35 stories above the hustle and bustle of Manhattan, she watched the gray horizon through the window of Delaney and Company. The numbers on her screen reflected against the glass, overlaying the drops that trickled down outside. 73% chance of sustainable growth in 5 years, she murmured, adjusting her discreetly framed glasses. They weren't just numbers to her. They represented jobs, communities, and a cleaner future. At 29, Grace carried on her shoulders a responsibility that few perceived. While most analysts only saw rising charts and percentages, she saw faces. A trait she had inherited from her mother, Margaret. The memory of Margaret still hurt, even 3 years after her passing. The battle against cancer had been brief and brutal, but until the end, her mother maintained that dignity that characterized her. "You have your father's heart and my stubbornness," Margaret would say between chemotherapy sessions. "Use both wisely." Grace's father, Thomas Parker, had been a respected accountant until he took the blame for a fraud he hadn't committed. His partner, a friend of 2 decades, had embezzled significant funds from clients. When the fraud came to light, Thomas protected his friend who had 3 young children to raise. "It's easier for me to start over," was his justification to his perplexed wife. But he never started over. Shame consumed him like rust, slowly eroding his confidence. Margaret supported the family by working as a teacher, while Grace grew up watching her father wither in silence, a hostage to a choice he never questioned. "Grace, is everything okay?" Melissa's voice, her assistant, brought Grace back to the present. The digital clock showed 7:42 p.m. She had been working for almost 12 hours. "Yes, just finishing the details for Monday's presentation." "Shouldn't you go have dinner? You've been working on this project for months." Grace smiled, closing the laptop. "You're right. I just want everything to be perfect." Perfection was both her refuge and her trap. This project was not just any negotiation. Burt Capital, one of the most ethical investment managers in the market, was considering merging with GreenPath, a renewable energy startup with promising technology. The combination could revolutionize the financing of sustainable projects across the country. For 3 months, Grace immersed herself in numbers, projections, and environmental impact studies. She built a financial model that balanced solid returns with investments in rural communities where the new solar plants would be installed. The project had her soul in it. On Friday, as she arrived at the office, Grace noticed odd looks directed at her. Melissa seemed nervous as she approached her desk. "Mr. Delaney wants to see you." Now, Charles Delaney's office occupied the northeast corner of the floor, overlooking Central Park. The 62-year-old CEO was known for his traditional, some would say outdated, approach to business. "Grace, come in," he said when she lightly knocked on the slightly open door. Inside the room, she immediately noticed they were not alone. Ethan Reynolds, the vice president's son and the company's apparent heir, was comfortably seated in one of the leather chairs, displaying a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Take a seat," Delaney indicated. Grace obeyed, feeling a growing unease. "I've been reviewing the strategy for the presentation to Burt Capital," began Delaney. "It's too important a client for us to risk." "I completely agree," responded Grace. "That's why I redid the projections 3 times and included alternative scenarios too." "We've decided that Ethan will lead the presentation," Delaney interrupted, his tone leaving no room for discussion. The air suddenly seemed thin. Grace felt her hands grow cold. "Excuse me." "It's a strategic decision," Delaney explained, avoiding her gaze. "Ethan has executive presence and better represents the image we want to project." "Executive presence," Grace repeated, the words sounding hollow. "And what about the content? I know every detail of this project." "Ethan will be properly prepared," said Delaney. "You can transfer your files to him today." Ethan smiled, adjusting the Italian tie that probably cost Grace's weekly salary. Don't worry, Parker. I'll take your work very seriously. There was something about the way he said your work that sounded like your little science project. Grace swallowed hard, fighting the sense of injustice growing in her chest. Mr. Delaney, I've worked on this proposal for months. I know Burke Capital's needs, the values Jonathan Burke prioritizes. It's not just about numbers. Precisely, cut in Delaney. It's not just about numbers. It's about trust, connection. Ethan plays golf with Burke's son. He has the right profile for this. Grace wanted to argue, but years of working on Wall Street had taught her when a battle was lost before it even began. With a brief nod, she stood up. I'll send everything by the end of the day. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall for a moment, taking a deep breath. It wasn't the first time her work had been attributed to someone else. But in this case, it hurt more. This project meant something to her. On the morning of the presentation, Grace watched discreetly from the adjacent room, through the glass partition. Ethan was wearing his most expensive blue suit, gesturing as he explained slides he hadn't created. As you can see, the numbers are impressive, he said with fabricated enthusiasm. 40% return on investment in the first 3 years. Grace cringed. She had been clear in her notes. 27% was the realistic projection. 40% was the extreme optimistic scenario, almost impossible without sacrificing sustainability components and community impact. Jonathan Burke, sitting at the head of the table, frowned imperceptibly. At 58, the CEO of Burke Capital had built his reputation by distrusting overly optimistic projections. His gray beard and calm demeanor hid a sharp mind that saw beyond polished numbers. When Ethan began detailing the marketing strategy instead of explaining the community investment model Grace had developed, she could no longer watch. She grabbed her bag and quietly left the office. That night, in her modest apartment in Queens, Grace prepared chamomile tea. She opened the drawer of the living room table, taking out a polished wooden box where she kept her mother's letters. The last one, written in the hospital a few days before passing, was slightly yellowed. Dear Grace, do you remember the time you lost the lead role in the school play? You cried all night, saying life was unfair. The next day, your smaller role as a narrator stole the show. Do you know why? Because you put truth into every word. People may forget what you said or did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Remember this even in the cold world where you work. You will have to be a light among shadows that won't always recognize your brilliance. It doesn't matter. Light doesn't shine to be seen. It shines because it's its nature to shine. With all my love, Mom. Grace fell asleep with a letter by her side, Margaret's words echoing in her dreams. The next morning, the office was in a frenzy when she arrived. Melissa practically ran to her desk, eyes wide. Grace, you won't believe what happened. Before she could elaborate, Charles Delaney appeared in the hallway, his usually impassive face now twisted into an expression of concern. Parker, my office. Now. Grace followed him, feeling the gaze of her colleagues on her. Inside the office, she found Ethan pacing back and forth, his face red. Close the door, Delaney ordered. He slid a paper across the desk towards her. It was a printed email, sent at 6:47 that morning. From Jonathan Burke, j.burke@burkecapital.com, to Charles Delaney, c.delaney@delaneyco.com. Subject, merger proposal, condition. Charles, thank you for yesterday's presentation. However, after careful consideration, I will only resume negotiations if analyst Grace Parker is leading the project. I received a preliminary memorandum from her 6 weeks ago that demonstrated vision, clarity, and, above all, humanity. What I saw yesterday was a polished presentation, but lacking the integrity I seek in partners. My decision is final. Either Grace Parker leads this process, or there is no deal. Sincerely, Jonathan Burke. Grace reread the email twice, unable to fully process what she was seeing. Ethan seemed furious. This is absurd. How can he do this? The presentation was flawless, he protested. Delaney ignored him, focusing his gaze on Grace. Explain yourself. How did Burke receive a memo from you? Did you contact him directly? Grace took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. No, sir. 6 weeks ago, when I finished the first draft of the proposal, I sent an executive summary through the official channel. His assistant confirmed receipt. It was just standard protocol. It wasn't just protocol, Delaney retorted. It was your job. And now we're in an impossible situation. Impossible? Questioned Grace. Mr. Delaney, I can lead this project. I know every number, every strategy. That's not the point, Ethan intervened. The point is you must have manipulated Burke in some way. You probably painted a negative picture of the company. I would never do that, Grace replied firmly, maintaining her composure. I believe in the work we do here. I just presented the facts transparently. Delaney sighed, running his hand through his gray hair. We have a meeting with Burke tomorrow at 10 a.m. Grace. You'll be there. Ethan too. That's not necessary, protested Ethan. I can handle it by myself. Apparently not, Delaney replied dryly. Burke was quite clear. The next morning, Grace chose a simple yet elegant navy suit carefully. She pinned her brown hair in a low bun and wore the butterfly brooch that her mother used to wear when she taught, a silent reminder of who she was and where she came from. In the elevator on the way to the meeting room, Ethan did not hide his irritation. I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted. I never wanted anything other than to do my job correctly, Grace responded calmly. We're not competing, Ethan. We're all working towards the same goal. How touching, he mocked. Did you save that line for your motivational speech? The doors opened before she could respond. Jonathan Burke was already in the room, talking quietly with Delaney. When Grace entered, he stood up to greet her. Ms. Parker, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person, he said, extending his hand. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Beck, Grace replied, surprised by the warmth in his eyes. Shall we get down to business, suggested Delaney, indicating the seats at the table. For the next 2 hours, Grace conducted the presentation as she had originally planned. She explained every aspect of the project, from realistic financial projections to the community investment program for the small towns where the solar plants would be built. What impresses me most, Ms. Parker, is how you integrated financial return with measurable social impact, Burke commented, examining the charts. Most proposals I receive treat sustainability as an add-on, not as the core of the business model. I believe the two elements are inseparable, Grace replied. Renewable energy is only truly sustainable when it benefits not only investors but also the communities that host it. Burke nodded, a subtle smile on his lips. That's exactly what you wrote in that memo. True value lies not just in the percentage return, but in the tangible transformation our investment can generate. Your words, weren't they? Yes, sir. At the end of the meeting, Burke extended his hand to Delaney. We have a deal. Burke Capital is officially interested in proceeding with this merger. As everyone began to stand, Burke added, with one condition, naturally. Grace Parker will be our main contact and will have the authority to implement the model as presented. Delaney hesitated only for a moment before agreeing. Certainly. Grace is one of our most dedicated analysts. As Burke was about to leave, he turned to Grace. Could you accompany me to the elevator, Ms. Parker? I have an additional question about the implementation schedule. In the hallway, out of earshot of the others, Burke stopped. I don't actually have a question about schedules. I wanted to make you a proposal. Grace waited, intrigued. Burke Capital is expanding its sustainable investments division. We need someone with your vision and integrity to lead this initiative. I'm offering you the position of associate director, with the freedom to build your own team. Grace's heart raced. This is unexpected, Mr. Burke. It's Jonathan, please. And it shouldn't be so unexpected. Talents like yours rarely get the recognition they deserve in traditional structures like Delaney and Company. How did you know? Grace asked. About the replacement, I mean. Burke smiled. I have a son who also works on Wall Street. A daughter too. I know how this game works. Besides, when I saw that young man presenting your work, it was obvious. He didn't truly understand what he was saying. Grace reflected for a moment. I will need some time to consider your offer. Of course. But don't take too long. People like you are rare in this world. Grace. People who see beyond the numbers, who understand that business can and should have a soul. That night, Grace climbed to the rooftop of her building. The city glowed under the dark sky, thousands of lit windows like earthly stars. She took the yellowed letter from her mother out of her pocket, rereading the words she knew by heart. The light doesn't shine to be seen. It shines because it's its nature to shine. Closing her eyes, she felt a gentle breeze touch her face, almost like a maternal caress. "I did it, Mom," she whispered to the starry sky. Without shouting, without stepping over anyone, just being myself. In that moment, Grace knew what her answer to Jonathan Burke would be. And she also knew that wherever Margaret was, she would be smiling. True wealth, after all, has always been in character, and in the quiet backstage of life. The pieces continued to move with a precision no Wall Street algorithm could ever predict.